let's get started. So thanks for joining me today for this session on Einstein Analytics Genius Dashboards. So my name is Rikke Hovgaard, and I have been working with Salesforce for about 6 years. I currently work for a partner called Make Positive as a consultant there to help implement Einstein Analytics as one of them at least. So when I started out using Salesforce, I started out in core sales and service cloud. And back then, I spent a lot of my time teaching other people how to actually build reports and how to also create dashboards. And when Einstein Analytics was launched, I then came to Europe, let's say that 2.5 years ago. I had the opportunity to attend a training session, and since then I've kind of helped other companies get ramped up on Einstein Analytics. So I really want to take my experiences and give them on to you guys and hopefully get you a head start on how to create some genius dashboards. Before I go into the actual session, when I start talking about Einstein Analytics, a lot of people say, what is it? Because a lot of people might have known or heard of wave analytics. It is the same thing. It's just been renamed. But just to kind of not have any confusion, Einstein Analytics, wave analytics, the same thing. So Einstein Analytics is Salesforce's advanced reporting tool. It's an add-on to your sales and service cloud, your core Salesforce. And it allows you to bring in data from your core setup into Einstein Analytics. You can also bring in third-party data if you want to. And when you have it in there, you can actually slice and dice your data on the fly and have a real interactive experience with it. Now, I would actually argue that we're not just dealing with dashboards, we're actually dealing with analytic apps, where you have an experience where you can actually make your dashboard, your app, more actionable with your Salesforce data. So when I started my journey with Einstein Analytics, my first dashboard was not really well thought through. As you can see up here, this is actually my very first dashboard from a training session 2.5 years ago. And there's no real intention with this dashboard, and there's no real story either. Today, I try to design my dashboards a little bit differently. Hopefully you can see that this is a little bit more structured. And I try to guide my users to gain knowledge throughout the dashboard. In this journey, I've actually tried a lot of different things. So I've tried to modify my graphs, I've tried to modify text colors, modify JSON, modified SQL, all these kinds of things, and kind of found what I think works when you design your dashboards. So with that, my intention is to actually share my experiences, my learning, and help you guys get some insight into how to design some good dashboards, so hopefully you can make them user-friendly and highly interactive. So I believe this is possible in 3 different principles. The first one is to target your dashboard to user roles. The second one is to understand what answers are being sought in your dashboard. And the third one is to calculate and compare numbers without using or without writing any code. Now, I'll have a look at each one of these areas in more detail, and I'll try to relate it back into a presentation or dashboard I've designed for this presentation, using some free and available data on the San Francisco bike share. Okay, so creating dashboards in Einstein Analytics is very easy, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're any meaningful. So let me ask you one question. Have you ever opened up a dashboard where you actually didn't know what you're looking at? I can't be the only one. So that's typically questions I will have. Is this pipeline for this month? Is it for the next 3 months? Are my cases opened or are they closed in this dashboard? And if you don't understand what you're looking at, the likelihood of people using the dashboard is very slim. I would actually argue they won't use it. So I have 5 principles that I use every time I design my dashboards. So the first one is to choose your audience and know your audience. So if you know your audience, it's going to be very easy to understand what they're actually looking for, so you can add that information into your dashboard. Whoops. Of course, it's back, great. So if you think about designing a dashboard for top management, you know they want to have an overview of how the company is performing. But if you're designing a dashboard for the sales reps, they're more interested in understanding how them themselves are performing. So in my dashboard up here, my intention is for the San Francisco bike share, or the employees of the San Francisco bike share planning department. And they're interested in having insight into how the trips are and also how the weather is influencing that. The second principle is to make sure that your dashboard is readable at first glance. So you want to make sure that you describe what people are looking at in your dashboard, and you also want to make sure that you are grouping your data into different categories. So what I'm using here is I'm trying to make it very clear that you have information on that this is an overview dashboard first of all, but also have information on the trips as well as the weather information. Even within for each of my widgets here, I'm making sure that it has a clear headline so you know what you're looking at. And if you're using any predefined criteria, such as we could be talking about planned trip versus completed trips, you want to make sure that people understand that when looking at the graph. You don't want to confuse anybody and make any assumptions that they know that. Also, my numbers, I try to put in information about what they're looking at. So if you're looking at the average duration, it could have been seconds, it could have been hours. Now this is in minutes, and I've specified that very clearly, so people are not actually in doubt about that. One thing I always use when I design my dashboards is I'll ask, would my grandma understand what she's looking at? You don't have to use my grandma as an example, but you can also use any non-tech or anybody without the context of what you're doing. Because if the answer is no, I have to go back and make some modifications to my dashboard. If it's yes, great, I can move on, but always bear that in mind. So the next principle is to know what is actually important on your dashboard and make sure you draw the attention to it. So when you look at a dashboard, what naturally comes first is your graphs. They're bigger, they're colorful, so that's where your eye will focus first. But if everything pops on your dashboard, it's going to be really hard to actually notice everything at once. So have a play with containers, with your text size, with the text color in order to kind of guide the user throughout the dashboard. So one thing here I've done, you'll notice, is my headlines, my main headlines, they'll have a bigger font. And they will also have a darker color. Where my supporting text to my widgets and to my numbers, I try to make them a smaller text size and also a lighter color. That way they're just kind of secondary into what you're noticing. Also, when you work with this, then make sure that you can use lines and containers to guide your users as well. So for instance, I've separated my weather and my trip information, so it's, it's clearly to see what you're looking at. And within each of my containers, I'm using lines to see what is actually the text and graph that belongs together. So it's a very easy way to manage that. So the next one is to make sure that you use any relevant graphs and visualization. If you work with Einstein Analytics, you'll know that with every release, there is coming more graphs. There's a lot to choose from. So have a look at what actually suits your data story. So if we look up here at the public times of the day, I could have chosen a pie chart, but I have 24 values, so it will be really hard to actually look or compare and see what each area means. So I've chosen a bar chart instead. And that allows you to easily see what is the activity for each hour, but also compare each hour slot. The final one is to make sure that you're using a consistent layout. So when you introduce a dashboard, people will quickly learn how to navigate it. And if you start changing it around too much, people will get confused. So if you always have your list selector or date criteria up in the right corner, then keep them there. If you have any key metrics in the left side, then make sure you keep them there. I'm sure I'm not the only one who knows or started working with Salesforce when it was Classic. And I'm sure that when Lightning was introduced and you saw that for the very first time, you got really confused. At least I know I did. That's kind of the same thing you'll trigger if you keep changing your layout. So make sure it's consistent and don't change it without any reason. So Einstein Analytics is a very powerful tool, as we talked about. And we also talked about how you can easily slice and dice your data on the fly. And we talked about how you should know your audience. And if you know your audience, you also know what questions they have. So why not accommodate for those questions using filters and selections in your dashboard? So with my example here, I've anticipated a few questions that my users will be asking me. So the first one is that my users are not only interested in seeing the trips in general, they want to look at it for specific time periods. So what I've done is I've introduced 3 filters or lists where they can select year, month, and day, and that allows my users to be a lot more flexible for what they're looking at. I could have made it very fixed and have graphs for, let's say, this month or last year, but instead I'm actually saving some place and making it a lot more flexible. So the second thing that I've anticipated is that my users, they want to be able to see the trips as, general, but they also want to look at subscription types. So they want to have a look at, if it's annual subscriptions or if it's one-off trips. Does it look any different? So again, I could have introduced a lot of graphs. I have 2 different dashboards filtering on that, but instead I'm having a toggle option so they can select whatever they want or not select anything at all. The third thing that I've anticipated is my users want to look at what is the most used and what is the least used start and end station. So they can start planning where to put the bikes. Now, again, I could have put 4 different graphs showing that, but instead I've chosen just to add 2. And they can switch between most used and least used start and end station. The final thing that I know is that when my users are starting to navigate this and exploring and finding answers to some of their questions, they also know that they might want to start interacting with stuff over in Salesforce. So they might want to create a task because they find something they have to follow up on. Well, by enabling actions, I can actually do that. So in the dashboard, but they're actually creating things to follow up on within Salesforce. So that's really smart. So when you start with all this and start making, your users have the ability to make better decisions because the dashboard is being so much more flexible and powerful, just remember that when you introduce the selections that you indicate where they apply. Is it for the whole dashboard, as I did with my date selection? Or is it for part of the dashboard, as with the trip type? Or is it for a specific widget, as we did for the most used and least used stations? Also, and I talk from my own experience here, when you start finding out the powerfulness of this, you start introducing a lot. Don't. Keep it simple, because people actually end up getting a lot more confused when they have too many options. So you want to make it, powerful, but hold back a little bit. So once you've decided or created your first dashboards, you're going to get questions to do some more complex stuff. And the typical questions that I get is, how is the percentage change month for month? Or can I compare my year-to-date result from this year with my year-to-date result last year? And yes, you can do that. You can do that with compare tables. So for a minute, I will jump out of my presentation and I'll sit down to do a demo of that. Hopefully I'm not ruining that. Whoops. It's going to be a good demo. Yeah. So I am now within Einstein Analytics, and I have kind of prepared a dashboard. So what I want to do, and I just want to check, can everybody see this also in the back, or do I have to zoom in? Okay, good. Else just let me know and I'll do it. So if the first thing I want to look at is compare my result by month. So I want to see what is the increase in percentage. The first thing I'll do is I'll click on my blue button, create a step, and I have to choose what data I want to use. So I'm going to take my trips January 18, and I'm now taken to the Explorer. And if you are used to working with Einstein Analytics and you haven't had a chance to look this week, you might notice that Spring 18 has come and it's making things look a little bit different. So we'll try and do my best here. But anyway, the first thing I want to do in here, in the builder, is I want to switch to my compare table. So I have a table mode here, and I can choose my compare table. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to group this by month, right? So I'm going to make a grouping, and I'm going to choose my trip date, and I'm going to choose a year month. So as you can see, as I'm changing, everything is, updating. And this is supposed to be my number of trip, but I also want to add another one. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to clone that column. Now I'm ready to make my changes. So I'm going to check the first one again. And instead of cloning, I'm going to edit this column. And you can now see I have my A and I have my B column. The first one is just number of trip. I'm going to keep it as is, but I just want to make a change, which is call it something different. So I'm going to say number of trips. And I'm going to hit apply. And you can see that now that has been updated from count of rows to number of trips. I'm now going to switch over to my column B. And in here, what I want to do is also give it a name. So I'm going to say month on month change. I'm just going to put a percentage here as well. You can choose to build your own formula, or you can just go in and choose one of the predefined, which I'm going to do. And this is this one called period over period. So by default, we'll populate these. We can go in and change it. For this purpose, I'm just going to keep as is. So I'm going to hit apply, and you can now see how this has changed. I am now going to close this down. I could go into my builder now, but I just want to make one final change. And that is, I don't really need the trips. I just need my percentage change. So I can click here, and I can hide the column. It's still keeping the calculations, but I'm just not viewing it to the end user. So with that done, I'm just going to give this name or this new. That's just when you start looking at the JSON afterwards, it's easy to kind of know where to find it. So I'm going to hit done. So now you can see over here, I have my new step. I can choose and drag that in here, and you can see it gives me a table. That might be good for some, but it is also not that pretty to look at. So what we can do instead, we can take the exact same step, and we can pull it into a graph widget. And it actually modifies or shows it a little bit more visually pleasing. So that's how you do that. The next one I wanted to show was how do we actually see year-to-date with year-to-date last year. And again, it might be a little bit difficult to think about how you do it, but it's actually quite simple. And don't get scared when I move into a little bit of the code, but you don't have to do much. So again, I'll create my step. I'll choose the same data set. And again, I'll want to move over to compare tables. So I'm exactly the same as before. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to have two columns, right? I want to have one column for my year-to-date this year, and then year-to-date last year. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to clone my column, and then hopefully, then I have now two columns. The next thing is I want to add filters to my columns. So for the first one, I'm going in here, and I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to choose a date. And I can switch between absolute range or relative to now. So I'm going to choose the relative to now, and I'm going to switch over to the days. So I'm going to drag this now. So I'm going to say from 7 days ago until today. And I'm going to add that. The next one here, I'm going to do the same thing, or almost same thing. I'm going to add a filter, and also relative to now. I'm going to keep the years for this one, and I'm just going to drag it back to 1 year ago to 1 year ago, or last year to last year. And I'm going to add that one. So this is kind of the basis of what we need, and that's, you know, making the solution do it for you. And now I'm going to switch into SACO mode. And don't be scared, it's not really that difficult. And now I probably want to zoom in a little bit. Is that okay for everybody? Yeah. So what you can see here is just the information that Einstein Analytics needs in order to kind of do your calculation. So what I want to highlight is this here. I want that to be not 7 days ago, but I want it to be current year. So I'm going to put in current year to current day. That's all I'm going to have here. The next one, I'm still going to have 1 year ago, and I'm going to have till, I'm going to delete this one as well, say current day minus 1 year. That's all I need to do in terms of my filters. I want to change the naming down here. A and B doesn't really sound that great. So all I'm going to do is say year to date, and I'm going to call that one here year to date last year. I now can run it, and you can see it has been updated. I can actually switch back into my bar chart. And here, and this is where I think it's this one. Yep, it's with the new design. I can now choose my bar chart. Instead of having two, I actually want to make sure that I have it in the same axis. So axis mode, I'm just going to choose a single axis, and there we go. Now I'm ready to just hit done. And you can see I actually forgot to give it a name, but I know it's lens 1, so I can pull that over. You might notice that it's a little bit wrong here, and that's because I already have a predefined filter to look at this 2017. So I want to remove that. I'm going to go into steps, and I'm just going to hit this checkbox. And that's all. So that was the demo. So what are some of the things that we covered today in order, whoops, what am I doing now? There we go. So some of the things that we covered today in order to make your own Genius dashboard, that was first, to know your audience. The second thing was to make sure that your dashboards are easy to understand. Then we talked about how to guide the data story. And then talked about using relevant visualizations. Make sure your dashboard is consistent. We don't want to have the whole lightning situation again. Try and anticipate questions that will be asked, and then make sure that you accommodate for that. And then use different selection widgets and also the actions to empower your end users. And then finally, get more insight with compare tables. You see a lot of people taking pictures. I'll just hold here for a little bit. Good. So if you want to learn more about Einstein Analytics, I created a trail mix that I think is kind of, you know, how to get started. I also took a lot of the takeaways from today. I have a series of blog posts. I collected it all together, so you can find it on that link as well. There's also, if you've never played around with Einstein Analytics, I actually wrote a blog post not too long ago about how to get started. So it gives you links to different places. So if you want to have a look at that, go in. It's also in there. But that's about it. So if any question, hopefully easy one too. Yeah.
I found the syntax you're making in the queries with the date, current year, that's unfamiliar to me. Is there a documentation to what kind of keywords you can use, or is it specific to Salesforce or to a date object?
Yeah, so Salesforce, in Einstein Analytics, you use SACO, so Salesforce Analytics Query Language. That's what we have to use. There is a developer guide, and I actually think that I've linked to it in that one blog post where you can see all the different syntax options that you can do. One thing I also find, if you want to learn how to do this code and like get a little bit more advanced, is install. So Salesforce also have something that's called the Sales and Service app. It's pre-built dashboards, and they're quite complex. So if you want to have a look at that, you can always install that app. It's, you know, if you have Einstein Analytics, if you have the developer org, you can just do that, and you can have a look at the code. So Command E or Control E, and you're in the code, and you can just start looking at how to actually build it. Yeah? Yeah.
What about use of color, conditional formatting?
So in the bar chart, you can actually do conditional formatting. I didn't show that up here. In terms of colors, there are certain ways to do that. Not all graphs allow you to change the color yet. I know, and I'm not sure Skip, he can confirm that, but I know they are looking at changing the color format. There are certain, like the pie chart, you can go in and change what is called the extended metadata file, and you can say for each value, so let's say you have stages, then you can have what is it called, negotiating that has to be color blue, and you define the hex color for that. But it doesn't work for all the graph types, so you kind of have to play around with it and see if it works. But I do believe it's on the roadmap, forward-looking statement and everything. But it is something that they're aware of. Yeah. One thing to add to that, actually, you can choose different themes if you want to have a light theme, if you have a light background, or if you have a dark, so you can switch between that, so it's optimized. But yeah, that's still predefined.
So how easy it is to do this, but on a regular context? So if you want to do export for a specific account?
I think it's quite easy to get started with, but you have to be mindful. I'm afraid I'm actually running out of time now, so I'll happy to answer that question afterwards. I'm going to stick around, so yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.